I'm John Wilker, the organizer of 360 IDEP. I hope you enjoy this session recording, but first I wanted to mention one thing. We've served the community since 2009, and over the past few years we've had to take on debt in an effort to keep the conference alive. After several unforeseen challenges, not the least of which is a pandemic of indefinite duration, we've had to make the hard choice to end the conference as we're now facing over $100,000 in debt. As a result of requests from the community of how they can help, we've created a GoFundMe campaign. If you're inclined and able, please consider donating to help keep 360 IDEP going. The QR code after this will link you to the campaign. Thank you. Enjoy the recording.
All right, everyone, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you for coming to this session. My name is Mohammad Azam, and I'll be talking about server-driven UI. All right, let's see. Here's a little bit about me. I go with my last name. Well, technically, I don't really have a last name, but I go with whatever comes last, which is Azam. And I am an instructor at Digital Crafts, where I teach web development as a coding bootcamp instructor. I'm also a Udemy instructor, so I have a lot of courses on Udemy. That's just something that I do on the side. And I have some courses on LinkedIn Learning, YouTube channel, author, speaker, very beginner rock climber, nothing crazy. And love to go on different trails and hiking trails. Actually, this was taken in April 2022, Lake of Glass. If you ever get a chance to visit, definitely do that. Since right here in Colorado, Rocky Mountain National Park. I'm not from Colorado, I'm from Houston, but I often come over here to explore the beautiful, beautiful state. Just be careful, the last part is quite weird, all right? All right, talking about weird, let's talk about server-driven UI. So in order to understand server-driven UI, first you have to understand what is not server-driven UI. You have always or already worked on apps where you have a iPhone app, like a client. It makes a request to the server, and the server returns you some sort of a response, and that response is then eventually displayed to the screen. The response might look something like this. But it can be different depending on what you're sending back as JSON, and then eventually it gets displayed on the screen. All right, pretty simple stuff. And this is perfectly fine. I'm not saying this is wrong or right. This is what most of the app does, and it's perfectly fine in most of the scenarios. But what if we want to change the user interface? Well, let's talk about that. But first, you create your app, and then you publish it. So once you do all of those changes, you publish it to the App Store and to the Google Play Store and to the web. All right, so that's done. Now, what happens if you publish the app and now you want to make some changes? Not like you want to add some components, but maybe the carousel, which is already part of the API that you send, not API, APK, or the library, the package, you want to just put it on the top instead of the bottom. You want to put the rating on the bottom, not on the top. So how would you do that? So this is one of the examples what we want to do. This is our UI on the left, and we want to do that. The carousel on the top, keeping in mind, and that's the most important part, carousel control, which you see on the right-hand corner, it's already part of the binary which is available on the App Store. So we're not going to change anything, dynamically inject anything to your library. That will be illegal, and you will be banned from the App Store, or your app will not be accepted. All right, so we're not changing anything. It's already part, the carousel is already part of the binary that you push to the App Store. But now you're like, well, I didn't use it, I want to use it, so what should I do? Well, you will simply make the changes. You will put it on the top, change the color button, whatever you want to do. And then again, you will publish it to the App Store, to the Google Play Store, and to the web. That's pretty normal stuff. Everybody has done that. All right? And this is perfectly fine. This is what most of the apps work. But now the question is, what if we can update the UI remotely without publishing a new binary to the App Store? And we can do it instantly. Not only for iOS, but Android and web and maybe some other platforms. What if we can do that? And that is where your server-driven UI comes into play. If you have ever used app like Spotify, Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, they're already doing this. You might not notice it, but they're already, some portion of their pages are already based on the response from the server, which I'm going to show you how you can create a very simple example. Now, a disclaimer over here is that server-driven UI is an architectural pattern, and use the best pattern based on the requirement of your app. So don't go home or go to your company and, okay, let's do server-driven UI and change everything. That's not what I'm trying to say over here. Maybe some portions of your screen can be updated to server-driven UI, but it's a very kind of like a different edge case, different kind of a case that it is catering to. All right. So now let's go ahead and talk about, so we already learned what is not server-driven UI. Now let's talk about what is server-driven UI. So we have already published an app using the server-driven UI principles, and that app bundle already contained the list view, the rating view, and some other controls like carousel, just like before. It's already there. All right. You have a client, meaning your iPhone app or Android app or web. It's going to make a request to the same server, which is now supporting server-driven UI. And it's going to return, obviously, some sort of a response, like probably JSON, hopefully, not XML or SOAP. But this time, your response will be a little bit different. And that is where the server-driven UI comes into play. You can see the response includes not only the data that you want to display on the screen, but it also contains the components that you should use to display that data. So you can see on the top, we have a carousel, and on the bottom right there, we have a list. All right, and that's the important part. The server is dictating that what control the client will use to display different views. So this means I can just go to the server, and instead of the carousel, I can swap it out with ratings view, and now I will display rating. I don't have to publish the app to the App Store and the Google Play Store and the web and everything. Everything will change instantly. All right, and the list is right there at the bottom. Let's take a look at a different screen. So this is kind of like a pet listing screen, but let's go ahead and take a look at a pet detail screen. Very simple project. Same thing, response coming from the server. It has a type, meaning this is the type of control or a component you should display on the top. And on the bottom, you should display a component called text row. So on the top, we have the image of a dog, and on the bottom is the text row, which is displaying the name. Okay, somebody says, well, how about rating? Remember when we launched our application, our library contained the rating view? So now we can add that. We can simply go ahead and add the rating view or the rating row, and we don't have to publish it to the App Store. It will immediately reflect the changes, and it will display the rating view, provided that the rating view was already available in the library. All right, so if you're thinking, well, shouldn't this be illegal, like from App Store review point of view? It's not. We're not changing anything. We're not injecting any logic. All the components are already part of the API or the APK, the library, the package that is available on the App Store. You're just saying that I want to use this one and not that one. If you want to put your rating instead of the text row, you can just simply switch their order and it will reflect those changes instead of pushing out a new version. So that is the server-driven UI, where your UI is driven from the server. And I think the best part is the same JSON and the same server can be used to give the data to an Android app and the web app, and they will immediately update. So no reason to push three different packages, three different libraries or apps to the App Store. Simply changing this will accommodate all of them at the same time. Now, server-driven UI apps can be created in many different ways. Here's the architecture that I'm going to show you. That's not like this you should use this or else it will not work. This is just a very simple server-driven UI architecture. The server is going to send you JSON back to the model, which is just structs, decodables. It's going to give it to a component, and the component will render the view. That's it. All right? All right. That's it. I don't really do much slides, so I'm just going to do a demo. All right. Let me first drink some water. And if you have any questions, just interrupt me. You can ask questions if you want. All right. Okay. So we need a server, obviously. You can create your server in any technology that you want. I'm creating my server in Node and Express, JavaScript. You can create in Vapor, server-side Swift, Django, Ruby on Rails, ASP.NET, Go. It's up to you. It doesn't matter. Whatever you want, you can create your server. My client, which is, everyone can see the text, or should I increase the size? Everyone can read it. I'll have all the code available to you. It's a lot of code, but I'll give it to you, all the code. All right. Client is obviously iOS client. You can make a React client for web apps, or Jetpack Compose client for Android, Flutter client for Android, whichever one you want. And the client over here is simply displaying whatever the server is returning. So let me go ahead and simply run the app to show you and make some changes so you can see what's going on, and then we can dive into how it happened. So the first thing I need to do is I need to run my server. This is running locally. You can host it on Heroku, it's free, right? So now our server is running. This means that my app should connect with that server, and I can hopefully run my app. You'll see the app doesn't really do much right now. I mean, if I run the app, you might just see one image and that's it. The server is telling my iOS app that, hey, display image, and that's it. That's all the server is saying. And if we look at the server, this is I'm just going to make some changes, and then we're going to dive a little bit more deeper into it. So here is the URL that I'm going to, pet listing. So basically, when I launch the iOS application, it goes to the pet listing URL, and it gets some data back. The data that is getting back is right there. Page title, I'm not really doing anything with it. Components is the main thing. Components is an array, so the server is telling the client, meaning an iOS app, that, hey, you better display a component called featured image, which is already part of the binary that we pushed out. So I'm not injecting something new. If I erase featured image and I write grid over there, it's not going to work. If I write some sort of a progress view control over there, it's not going to work. I don't have those controls in the library, in the package. The only control I have in the package are list, carousel, featured image, rating, text row. And those are the only thing you can accommodate. If you create some new controls in the future, which probably you will, then you will have to actually push out, just like normally, push out the binary to the App Store. There is no workaround with that. All right. So right now the server is saying, if somebody requests pet listing endpoint, the URL, the API, this is the JSON you're going to return. Components that you're going to return is a type featured image, and the data, meaning featured image component needs some data to be displayed. That will be just a URL of the image, URL of the pet. But somebody tells me that, you know what? It would be nice to add text, like some sort of a description of the pet. So this means that I can simply go over here and use some sort of a control that will display description. I actually already have that control. It's called text row. Data. All right. Data, we're going to send its text, and it will be featured pet dot description. And we're going to look into what is featured pet and what is pets and all that stuff. But now, basically, this URL, pet listing endpoint, it's saying that if somebody goes over there, that we're going to return you two different components, the featured image component and the text row component. And then for the text row component, we're going to display the description of the pet. All right, and all of this description of the pet and everything is coming from an array, which is right here. It's not coming from the database, although it can, but it's just coming from an array. Okay, so I haven't made any changes to my client, my iOS app. Let's go ahead and run this. Not sure why it's taking so long to run, but now you can see that how our user interface UI has changed, and now it is displaying not only the featured image, but it is also displaying the text. Yeah. So this fetch is happening when you launch the app for the first time. All right. Now you can cache it. Like if you want, you can cache all of those things. That is definitely, you can do those things. That's perfectly fine, and you should definitely. If that data is not really changing, like if I'm displaying a list of pets, which is like 10 or 12 items that are not changing, then you can definitely cache those things on the client side. All right, obviously. So now you see that we didn't really change anything on the client. We didn't publish a new version of the app. It just appears. All right. And that is the real benefit of server-driven UI, where the server is saying that this is what you should be putting on the screen. This is what you should be displaying on the screen. Yeah.
Basically, two users running the same version of app might see different.
Well, depending on the version. Yeah. So we're going to talk about versions, and that's the main issue.
I launched the app, but you have not launched the app yet. So I might see different.
You will see based on, possibly, yes. If I have added a couple of different components that you have not upgraded your app, then you should see the old version or the old components.
Same version, right?
The same version, but old components. Yeah, different URL. Yeah. All right. So this is the essence of server-driven UI. And now let's go ahead and take a look at how this is all working. For server-driven UI, you have to start from the server. And once again, your server can be created in any different languages or frameworks. I'm just using Node and Express because that's what I teach on my day-to-day. You can see that over here, I have an array of pets, which have like 4 or 5 different pets. Each pet has different properties. Well, same properties, different values. Pet ID, title, image URL, description, and rating. All right. And the server is not really doing much. You can see server simply goes and find the random number. It finds a featured pet, and then it displays this kind of a JSON. It sends back the model object, which is just a JSON which contains page title and an array of components, and that's it. All right. But the real thing is happening on the client side. Let's look at the client side. We go ahead and not really going much. The client side contains the HTTP client. I'm just calling it web service. You pass in the load function, you pass in the resource that you're looking for. It simply fetch that resource, and whatever comes back from the server, it maps it to something called a screen model, but you can name it anything you want. If I look at the screen model is simply one-to-one mapping of whatever the stuff that we are returning from the server, which contains the page title and components. And a components is using over here component model, which we can take a look at it later. And eventually, the screen model contains the build component function, where it looks at all of these different type of components, featured image. These are all the components that I am currently using. Based on a component like carousel, because carousel component data that is being sent from the server will be very different from the rating, from the text row, from the featured image, I have created several different models, like carousel UI model, text row UI model, featured image UI model. So all of those are just simple structs. So the data can be mapped into those things. So since we were using text, let me show you the text row UI model. It's really nothing going on. Remember in the text, we only wrote the text property, right? Right here. So that's the part that's going to be decoded into the model, like the UI model. And look at the featured image. Featured image, the data contains the image URL. So this means that there should be an image URL property somewhere over here in the featured image. Here it is. So it's kind of like one-to-one mapping. And eventually, if we go back to screen model, eventually it will add it to the component. You can see right here. All of those different components, featured image, carousel, whatever, they get added to the components, and then we go line by line and render all the components, which happens over here in the view itself. So each component has a function called render, and that's the job of a component to render a view. So taking a look at one of the components, let me actually build it. Did I add something to it? So taking a look at, let's say, featured image component, here is what the component looks like. Not really doing much. All the components are conforming to UI component, and all of them has a render function, which simply returns you the actual image. Well, the actual view. And you can see in the last one, I'm calling any view. Any view, there's a misconception about any view that it's not performing benefit and all that stuff. In certain situation, it might be, but in this, it's okay, it's fine. If you do all the calculation and performance tests, any view might come out to be on the top rather than on the bottom. All right, but you can use View Builder if you want to. And you can see different components like text row. It's like super simple. So the reason or the main thing the component is simply doing is render a view, and that's it. All right. And the good thing about this is, since it is driven by the server, if you decide that the text should be on the top and the featured image should be on the bottom, well, then just do it on the server. I mean, I don't think it's going to look nice, but we can do that if we want to. All right. Now, if I run the app, an Android person is going to run the app, and then web app person is going to run the app, mostly like React app, hopefully, then you can see, they can all see the changes reflected without pushing to the App Store. Let's go ahead and take a look at some other controls. Like a carousel control is a good one. Once again, I keep reminding you, these controls like carousel control, the text control, the rating control, they're already published on the App Store. They're already part of the package, the library, whatever you want to call it, APK. So it's not like I'm going to write ratings view and it's dynamically going to inject into the binary. It's not going to happen. And if it happens, I'm going to get banned, probably. All right. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we can display carousel. Carousel control is also part of the particular library. So type of the control is, if I can spell it right, carousel, probably. But carousel control contains data. All of them contains data. And that's one of the most important things, is I'm not writing type and data just willy-nilly. I sat down with the backend engineers, the Android engineers, the web engineers, the iOS engineers, and we came up with this particular pattern that this is what we should be using, because any changes made to the server and the response from the server, everyone is going to get affected. So it's not like iOS people are saying, no, you should send this. And then the server, the backend is like, no, I'm not going to send this. No, they have to work in extreme collaboration mode. All right. All right. So in the data for the carousel is a little bit different because carousel contains multiple images. So this means items. And if I remember correctly, let's go ahead and say, all right. Okay, not like this. We already have the pets, so we can simply say pets.map p, because I'm just coding it weirdly, and then return pet ID, which will be p.pet ID. So I'm only returning the pet ID, an array of objects which contains the pet ID and which contains a pet image, because that's what the carousel needs, an image URL. All right. Because a carousel contains multiple images, that's why. It's like 4 or 5 images or whatever. Let's go ahead and run our app. And there we go. We got carousel at the bottom. Now, maybe you want the carousel on the top. Well, just put it on the top then. Maybe you want carousel in the middle. Well, put it in the middle. It's up to you. So it really becomes easy for A/B testing also, right? You have one version of JSON that is doing carousel at the bottom and one is doing on the top, and you can easily test it out. All right. Now, in most of the application, carousel and list, they're not like just for display. Probably you can click on a carousel, like click on the image and go somewhere, hopefully. But how do we do all those clicks and all that stuff? So those things in server-driven UI are called actions. All right? Meaning you can click on something, you can tap on something, and something will happen. So how can we add actions? Now, there can be many different kind of actions that your button can do, your carousel can do. This can be presenting a shared sheet or pushing some data to some server. This can be navigation. Like when I click on a carousel, I should go to this view. When I click on a carousel, I should go to this view. So let's go ahead and see how we can do that. Now, actions are already there. I just commented it out, so I might have to go and uncomment it out. But let's go ahead and see if we can add actions. Now, actions are not added. I didn't add actions for featured image. Probably I should. But just to give you an example for carousel, if I can get it correct over here, action. So my action is more like, well, where do you want to go when you click on the carousel image, one of the images, all right, or any of the images, in other words, all right? So I think we will have a type. Do you want to display a sheet or you want to go a push navigation? I'm just going to say sheet. And where do you want to go? Well, I want to go to pet detail screen, which is kind of lame, but we'll just go to pet detail screen. All right. I will now go back to my code and uncomment it, some of the things, so that now we can see that how it actually works. Carousel, not over here. And I'm using the navigation view, but you're free, you can use anything you want. You can use the navigation stack or whatever. All right, let's go ahead and run this. Let's see if I've typed it correctly because I always get confused with the type and everything. Okay. Okay, so everything looks normal, everything looks the same, but hopefully now I will be able to click on these items. So now action is that it will take you to a particular destination. All right. If somebody says that, hey, you know what, we don't really want to go to pet detail screen, we want to go to pet profile screen. Well, okay, we will go to the pet profile screen, as you said. All right. Now we can go back and run it again. So remotely, I am also changing the navigation. I mean, pet profile screen just says pet profile screen, but I think you get the idea, you know. So remotely, I am changing navigation also. So this can be useful in some apps where you have created this navigation, but you want the ability to dynamically change it based on certain aspects. Now, maybe you don't want the sheet navigation or the modal that shows up. Maybe you wanted the push navigation. So we can also do these things. We can simply say, instead of sheet, we can say push. Now, obviously, the push navigation from the carousel might look really weird, but you can see it's a little bit different. All right. Now, all of this doesn't happen like magically. There's a lot of code that has been written on the client side, and that is actually one of the overheads you will have to take if you plan to go with that approach. But you can see that you can change the navigation on the fly, go from one place to the other. All right. Okay. Any questions at this point? Yeah. To get the picture instead of navigating? Yeah. I mean, I don't have that action. So the question is, can I click on the, what is that called, the image of a carousel, and will it take me, instead of taking us to a navigation, or performing a navigation, can I just show like a modal, like a slide up kind of animation? The main picture over here? I think, yeah, you should be able to do it. I don't have the code for it, but yeah, you can definitely do that. Yeah. So that will be an action that changes the state, and that state will reflect the selected picture. Mhm. All right. Yeah. To fill in the blanks? Yeah. So right now, my web service, as you can see, there's nothing really going on. So the question is, what happens if there's no internet? What's going to happen? Since right now it's not being cached, so you might just see like a white screen and nothing. But web service layer, that is completely separate, so that can have built-in caching. Like images can be cached and all this stuff. Yeah.
Since the UI can be different depending on the response, what do you actually submit to the App Store?
So we submit, so the question is, what do we submit to the App Store for review? We submit just the client itself, which is the app itself. The UI can be different, not based on the user. I wouldn't say based on the user per se, based on the version of the response that you're getting. And we're going to get into that because the versioning is a problem. You might get into those, and that's kind of like an open-ended question because there is no one answer how you're going to solve those things. Right? But for the client, what are you going to push to the App Store? You're going to push the iOS app to the iOS App Store, Google app to the Google Play Store, and web to the whatever web server you're using, and or, I mean the web app, the web client, and the server will be sent to wherever. I mean, I don't know, like Glitch, Heroku, wherever you want to push it, which is our node server. If you're a Vapor server, you might be pushing it to something else. I don't know. All right. Okay. Now taking the same example, and I don't know where we are going over here. Let's go to Sheet and Pret Detail. Okay. Now when we go to the pet detail, this is what gets triggered. A different URL, because pet detail is a different page. And currently, it's saying that the pet detail should only display us the featured image. But maybe we want to show the rating of the pet also. And the rating control, remember, that is part of the binary that we push to the App Store. It's already there. But I deleted it from my code just to show you how we can create it. So let's go ahead and create a rating control. And you will see that it's not hard to add different components. It's like 2-3 things you have to do, but we can do it quickly. The first thing we need to do is to add a rating model or a rating UI model. So rating UI model, which means that this is the decodable thing. This is the thing that the data is going to be decoded to. It will just have a single property, which is rating. That's it. But that's what we're going to send from the server. Rating row with rating 5. That's it. Or whatever the rating is. We also need to make a rating component because the component will be rendering the actual view. Rating component, struct, rating component, which is of type UI component. It's kind of hard to type over here. It's kind of very small. Okay, here we go. Import Swift UI. Rating components require you to implement an ID, which you can also send from the server, no big deal. And then we will render. And right now I'm just going to go with the cheap thing, which means the rating will be like 5. And we are going to say UI model, because the rating component needs the model to do something. So this is how you will create the rating UI model, which is kind of like a lame model because it simply displays your rating in a text, like 5, that's it, 6, 10, 4, 1, 2. What's the mic? Okay, rating, there we go. But we still have to update our screen model because the screen model is kind of capturing all the different controls it can support. Now, keep in mind that this is already there in the App Store. So what I'm showing you is just typing it out so you know that where you will have to make these changes. So rating row, not rating UI model, rating this one, and rating component. And I think that hopefully should be it. All right. Now, if we go to the server and somebody says that, hey, we should display the featured image, we should display the text description of the pet and also the rating. Okay. I think we already were displaying some sort of a text, I guess, right? So we can just copy that part just to save some time. There we go. And now we can go ahead and also probably display the rating. We should call it rating row because that is what the client is looking for with the rating, which is pet.rating. Hopefully that will work, but let's see. So now the featured, not the featured, but the pet details screen is displaying 3 different components instead of 1, the featured image, the text row, and the rating row. All of those components hopefully should be there in our iOS client and the Android client and the web client. All right. That should be okay. Let's go ahead and run this. And when I click on it, there we go. You can see the rating right there. Kind of looks lame, but you can definitely see it. It just says 5. So that's our rating row. It displays the rating. But we have a much better rating control, which is already available in the binary. So I'm just going to use that. This was just to show you that you can do this thing. But I'm not going to use this lame text row. I'm just going to use a rating view control and pass in the UI model.rating. Now, if I display it, I will get a different rating row, a much nicer rating row, like a star rating. All right. Now, just like that, you can add list also. I have a list also. I can show it to you if I can pull it up. Let's see. All those controls are already added to the binary. So let's find the list. List is kind of like hard to add because it's a bit of a code. We don't really need a list. I mean, that's in our page. But list means UI, what is it called? UI table view. All right. And I don't have the code for it, but list contains cells or rows, and you can even write code to make each cell configurable. So one can be a text cell, one can be image row, one can be rating row. So cells, it requires a little bit of a more code, but you can do that if you want. So I added the list to the pet detail screen. So let's see if it appears. And here's our list. And I think if I click on the list, it just shows you the pet detail because that's what the action of the list is saying. You can see right here. Action of the list is saying that you should display a pet profile screen. All right. Now, all of this may look cool, but there are some issues that you have to take into account in creating this, or if you're going for this particular route. And this will take us back to our slides. Which is somewhere. Oh, not sure I can display the slides. Okay. Okay. The biggest problem comes with versioning. What happens if you push out a new version of your app to the App Store that contains 10 different new awesome components, but your client, your customer never updates their version, they're still on version number 1? That's going to be a big problem, right? I mean, they might always see that lame text rating control, like 1 or 2, just displaying the text, not the stars. Now, this is more of an open-ended question because there's no one single answer. What are you going to do in that case? All right. Okay. Well, tell the user to update their app to get new components. I don't know. I mean, it's kind of weird. Some apps do that. When you launch the app, they're like, hey, can't use the app, you got to update. I don't know. Maybe you will do it, but it's kind of weird. Render old version of the components. Well, if I have pushed out a new version of rating which contains a star and they have the lame old text rating, then I will simply render that text, 1, 2, 3, whatever. All right. Don't render anything for brand new components. So just render a text, say that you have to update. All right. Now the rating works or the versioning works where your client is going to request to the server that I'm on version number 2, and the server is going to return you the components compatible with the version that you send. All right. So a couple of lessons learned. Although server-driven UI can be used for control, for components or control or views that take input, I usually find it harder to implement. And usually I find it to be a good solution for read-only views, like which you have already seen. I never took any input from the user. I mean, I can, but it becomes a little bit weird, a little bit more hard to do, right? So for those kind of components or those kind of pages and views where you're taking input, I will just use the old approach, just a normal whatever Swift UI provides or UI kit. The same JSON can be used by Android and web apps, which is really good. You will have to maintain a version of the server endpoint, and the server is going to return only the compatible versions or compatible components that the client can handle. No App Store review is required for these things, and no, you will not get banned. And it does require a lot of initial effort. Server-driven UI requires deep collaboration. So it's not like Android team and iOS team are sitting in their own rooms in the basement and working and not talking to each other. This requires actually more collaboration than normal, at least like double or 10 times more, because it's just one JSON to rule them all or something, right? You can download the source code. You can take a picture if you want, but you can download the source code of my talk from over here. And I do have since I do Udemy stuff, I do have Udemy course and a coupon for you and a link. If you want, you can definitely, if you want to dive a little bit more deeper into it, you can definitely do that. All right. All right. So this is my course. It's called Introduction to Server-Driven UI in iOS. And this link should have the coupon already applied. So if you just go to the link, coupon is already applied. The coupon code is 360 IDEV, but it should already be applied. All right. Some of the resources. Judo is a framework that is already doing server-driven UI, so that's a good framework to use. Airbnb has a lot of different articles as well as YouTube videos which talks about server-driven UI, and my link to the course is right there at the bottom. All right. And finally, I am also presenting another session on August 31st, which I believe is Wednesday, on augmented reality, which will have pretty much like 70% of the session or 80% is like all live coding. So if you are interested, you can definitely check that one out also. Here's my contact information. I don't really blog that much, but I'm usually creating YouTube videos or Udemy courses. Writing is just painful. All right. And that's it. Thank you so much for coming. Hope you have enjoyed it.